I'm Black Bright, broadcasting out of the UK. Welcome to my channel. First time you're passing through, you're welcome to click the thumbs up, the thumbs down. You know the drill. You can subscribe if you wish, or you can share, and you can interact with my subscribers. Today, I'm probably going to get rollicking. I'm probably going to disturb quite a few people, but I'm just going to talk as I do about certain thoughts I have about certain situations. Now, yesterday I was in such a situation and I was surrounded, I've been invited to a barbecue with a lot of professional people. And I was sitting there and a lady was talking to me. And I say she was talking to me because, yeah, basically she was talking to me. And she was telling me about all her accomplishments, for want of a better word. One of her accomplishments was living on a street where she was the only black person. Now, I've said that in the past. I've said when I bought my place in Stopsley, I said I was the only black person on the street. When I said it, I didn't really think about what that actually meant. What does that mean? What message am I trying to convey by saying I was the only black person on that street? I think, well, I think there's a difference, number one, whether or not you deliberately target white areas to go and live, whether you come across a property accidentally as in my case, or whether you just want to put a footprint in, or you want to rub someone's nose in it and prove that, yeah, black people have just as much a right to live in a certain neighborhood as anyone else, or whether you feel it's a sense of accomplishment. Now, like I said, thinking back, because I didn't know that the house I was buying was on a street that was white, it wouldn't have made a difference to me after I bought it to find out that they were white, if you see what I mean. And I think my thought process in that situation would be, wow, they're not going to like this. Or, and I had my negative experiences. But, I believe in change, and I believe that racism is through ignorance, and that once they get to know me, they'll realize I'm not a threat, I'm not a bad influence, I'm not going to bring down the neighborhood. And not that I thought I had a lot to prove, but I just felt as though, yeah, I'm going to stay here regardless. That's the rebellious side of me. I had a neighbour who was threatening to put his pit bulls on me and threatening to get me out in some other kind of way, break me down. But that didn't happen. But my point is that was, 20 years ago? Maybe about 18 years ago. And I'm not in that street now. But my point is that looking at it from a new perspective, I can only say, there was actually two ladies that were on the same page. And the first one was saying, oh, first they said they live in, say, for example, I'll just say Surrey for want of a better word, because I don't want to kind of make this person identifiable. So I'll say Surrey. And she said, I live in Surrey. But the area that she lived in was equivalent to Surrey, in as much as Surrey is considered an affluent area and predominantly white in certain areas. But she didn't say the actual town. And she was talking about other accomplishments, but I've done this by myself and I've done that. And I just wanted to bring it back to, I am the only black person on the street. And she said it with such pride. And I wondered if it was because white people set the standard and therefore she felt as though she had met that standard by living amongst white people, or whether for her it was an accomplishment, whether it was a deliberate area that she actually targeted. But it was interesting that she just said the county, not the Pacific area. And then there was another lady, similarly, and she mentioned, I'll say Kent for one. want of a better county. But it's one of the richest counties in the UK. And she spoke about being the only black person living in the area. And once again, my mind went back because now I'm kind of thinking more about what people say, why they say it. So I came back, and while we was talking, the only thing I was thinking at the time was basically, why is it important for you to tell me the area that you're living in, as opposed to me saying, oh, are you from around here? Do you live locally? Then I can understand somebody saying, yes, I live down the road, or I live in Surrey, or I live in Kent, or I live in Leatherhead, or I live in Malden, wherever they live. But to offer that information without any provocation, without being asked, I thought it was interesting. And I think it was compounded by all the other accolades. So obviously, this was a lady who wanted to be admired for her accomplishment. That was my interpretation. She'd accomplished a lot. She'd done it all on her own. And the fact that she'd finally made it on a street where she was the only black person seemed to be telling that she felt accomplished. The other lady, however, she was coming from more of a different standpoint. The way she spoke about her area didn't come over as a sense of accomplishment so much. It was more, well, I think it didn't really mean anything per se, but it was the language that accompanied the area that she lived, which made me draw a few conclusions. So what I'm saying is that basically when we consider ourselves as part of as a minority in a predominantly white area, what is that saying about us? What message are we trying to convey by making that statement? The same way I made that statement about I'm the only black person on the street, and that lady yesterday, she made the same statement, and the third lady made the same statement. And I heard a gentleman say, also said the same thing. He's the only black person in a place called Marlow, which is quite well off. And for him, it meant that he wasn't pigeonholing himself and saying, look, as far as I'm concerned, I have as much right to live in this neighbourhood as you do. So he was putting his footprint in the neighbourhood. And also he felt quite rebellious. And for him, yeah, you know, white neighbourhood, yeah, I'm rubbing your nose in it. I'm here. What are you going to do about it? So people have different reasons for saying, I'm the only black person on the street. My only concern with that is, depending on the motivation behind saying it can lead to a lot of assumptions and well, it kind of makes me question the type of person that they are, you know, because I think as adults now, are we still trying to prove that we're accepted? Or is by living in a neighbourhood where you're the only black telling other people that you're accepted, you're as good as? Is that the message? I mean, I'd like you to comment on this, because, you know, we can have our perceptions. I could, you know, if I hadn't been a bit more, if I wasn't so evolved now, I would probably, you know, I could have been a place where I might not even know the areas. Or I could have thought, oh, you know, wow, she lives in a neighbourhood she's the only black person. Wow, that's brilliant. How did she do that? And, you know, you'll have some people that will say, really? You live in that expensive neighbourhood? Wow. But we have to remember that neighbourhoods, like anywhere, the richest neighbourhood will have the poorest element to it. And I'm not saying that these people that I was referring to live in the poorest part, but when you're saying a county as opposed to a town, it does send a message that you want to be affluent by association. It's a bit like parents who live vicariously through their children. They might not have qualified, or they might not have any attributes that they're proud of, but they've done a good job through their children. And so you'll find them saying, oh, my daughter is a lawyer, my daughter is a doctor, my daughter is an engineer, my son is an astronaut, you know, and, they'll have this feeling of pride. And it's vicarious because they're living their pride through their children or through members of the family. Even some people say, oh, I know this famous singer, and that singer is my friend. It's almost that by association, you are giving yourself value. And what I'm trying to say is that you have value regardless. Would you be saying, I live in an area that's predominantly BAME, minorities? Would you be saying that I live in a poor area? Would you be volunteering? I would say, would you be volunteering that information as opposed to, living in a wealthy area or pseudo wealthy? You feel that you need to express that because that is what is giving you a sense of value or adding to your value then, depending on, your frame of mind or your frame of reference. Let me see. Yeah, I was trying to think, what is it? I asked myself by offering the region, Kent and Surrey, what message do they want me to receive? Was it I'm accomplished by saying I live in a white area? Was it white people set the standard and I'm one of them? That's a colonialized mindset. Was it I'm breaking the mold? There's someone taking out themselves out of their comfort zone. Some people just want to stay in the same area. They feel a bit, they wouldn't feel comfortable moving into an area where it's predominantly white. So they prefer to stay in their comfort zone. Is it coming from that space? Or is it deliberate? I'm going to rub my nose in it. I'm going to rub their nose in it. And therefore, that is why I'm choosing to live in that particular area. And in that case, you're prepared to live there regardless. And I also wondered why it needed to be said. Why, as opposed to saying, I live in Kent, I live in Surrey, I live in Hertfordshire, Harpenden. Is it necessary to say, I'm the only black person on the street? If you say, where do you live? I would say, I live in Redbourne, I live in Harpenden, I live in Dunstable. Would you then have to qualify it by saying, I live in Dunstable and I'm the only black person in my neighbourhood? What message? Why would somebody say that? Like I said, I've said it in the past. Lots of people say it. My mother said it. My mother said it back in the 60s. She was the only black person on the street, and she said, they're not going to get me out. They put banana skins through her letterbox. They said, go home, back to the zoo. Go back to your country. They called her monkey. They called her wog. They called her everything. And she said, they weren't going to get me out. She said, this is the house I wanted. And the funny thing is that they've all left or they've all died, and she was still living there up until the point. And of course, the road is now more diverse. But my point is, when she went up that road in Neasden, did she know that she was in a white area? Did she know that she wanted to pick that house because it was in a white area? Or did she just have a budget? And did she just have a location that she felt happy with? And that's what dictated her choice. Or did she deliberately go to an area where she knew she would be the only black person on the street? Now, my mum, it's probably the latter, because she's quite defiant. So it's interesting. I'm not saying that anything is right or wrong about whatever your motives are. I'm just putting the question out there why it seems important to qualify where you live, and only certain people qualify where they live, and add that. I mean, you wouldn't, what I'm saying is, if I lived in Harlesden, I wouldn't say I live in Harlesden and it's predominantly minorities. I don't know if I would add that. And so I was trying to understand why it needs to be qualified. What else did I want to say? I think it's important that their audience knows their status. Is that why they say it? Are they trying to tell their audience, i.e. whoever was in that barbecue, I'm not an ordinary person. I'm not your common John Joe. I'm actually an accomplished human being who has status. Is that what they're trying to tell us? Is that the message that they're trying to send? I'm not just a black woman. I'm actually a doctor. I'm actually a lawyer. I'm an engineer. I'm a pilot. And it's interesting because you get some people who even talk about their previous relationships. It's almost like they have to qualify their previous relationships by the jobs that person did, as opposed to they don't have that qualification. But I used to date somebody who was a nurse. I dated somebody who was a teacher. I dated somebody who was a lawyer. And why does that need to be qualified? Are these individuals trying to add worth to themselves vicariously or by association? Is there kind of a lacking of self-worth, why they feel they need to have that, in there under their bonnet? I don't know. And I also find some black middle class, because these are black middle class, I would say, tend to lack empathy. Not all, of course, tend to lack empathy for the common John Joe. A lot of them do. You'll find that if you want to talk about a subject to do with the youth getting stopped by the police, they'll say something like, oh, well, they must have done something to deserve it. Or what are they frightened for? If they've done something wrong, if they haven't done anything wrong, why would they be concerned? And I have to draw their attention to that banker who had done nothing wrong apart from have a good job as a bank manager, a beautiful home, drive a beautiful car, and the police tagged him and put every kind of criminal case against him. And he had to use up, I think it was about 14,000 to clear his name. Then what would they say? Oh, he's 1 in a million. Oh, that's a minority. That doesn't happen to everyone. Though, if you've got nothing to worry about. And there's almost this sense of superiority. And like I said, I'll probably rub up some people the wrong way. And I'm not talking about all middle class. I'm just talking about there's a minority of middle class black people out there. And I know it can happen with white people. Forget about the white people. I'm not talking about them. I'm representing my own. But there are quite a number of black middle class who feel that they are above. And instead of seeing themselves as being fortunate, blessed, having no adverse childhood experiences, so their resilience is built up. So their resilience is built up and they're more resourceful and they're able to accomplish more. It's almost like they feel as though those who haven't been able to achieve, it's their own fault. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But sometimes that is a general preconception. So, what else did I want to say? Oh, first of all, let me see if it's here or if it's over the page. I think it's probably over the page. So I'll stick with my agenda. Yeah, I also wondered whether or not it mattered what region black people came from. Like, okay, do Jamaicans behave differently from Kittians? Do Kittians behave differently from those from St. Vincent? Do St. Vincent's behave differently from those from Grenada? Do those from Grenada behave differently from those from Barbados? So, the black middle class across the board, is there a tendency for each one of them to behave the same and have that same sense of accomplishment and, feel as though they have to put it out there? You need to know what they've achieved, you need to know who they are. Or is it different? Do Africans have another take on it? Do they feel as though it's important to blow their own horn? I don't know. So, those people who talk about the area that they live and they just say the town, like say for example Kent. If you look up Kent, it's considered one of the most wealthiest counties. Kent and Surrey and Hertfordshire are considered the richest counties in the UK. But having said that, they still have their deprived areas within that. And so you've got the poor parts of Kent, which is Thanet and Swale, as opposed to somebody who says they live in Seven Oaks or Tunbridge Wells. You've got the poor parts of Surrey. They call that hidden Surrey because Surrey is meant to be one of the richest. Or, what's this? Okay, someone's sending me a message. And you have the poor parts of Surrey, which is Merstham, Maybury, Sheerwater, which is in Woking, Stanwell North, Westborough, which is in Guildford. And you have the rich part of Surrey, which is in Leatherhead. Now, if they say, oh, I live in Leatherhead, you'll know, wow, they've arrived. And does that mean anything? My goodness. Does it mean anything? Will it change your opinion of someone? I don't think it will. I don't think it should. Definitely for me, I don't care what area or what status you are, providing you're respectful and you communicate in a way that is healthy. Whether you say you live in Harlesden or whether you say you live in one of these so-called deprived areas, they've got areas in Luton even, that if you buy a property in those areas, they call them deprived, you don't pay no stamp duty. So they've got places like Berry Park, they've got places like certain parts of Leagrave, which they call the deprived areas, and you don't pay any stamp duty. But those areas, even though they're called deprived, still have nice houses in there. They still have nice properties. So when you're thinking about, it's like Marsh Farm in Luton has a reputation because of riots way, way, way back. But that's got some nice properties in there if you seek them out. So it doesn't really matter. I don't think people need to aspire to feel as though by reaching a certain place in life or having that achievement, that it somehow adds, it's a notch in their belt. And maybe for them personally it is. But I don't think when you're having conversations, I don't think the person that you're talking to is necessarily going to think, wow. I don't think they necessarily are. They're going to look for you. They're going to look at you. They're going to feel your spirit. They're going to know whether or not you come over as warm, whether you come over as sincere. And that's going to be what's important to that individual who that person is talking to. Not where they live, not how rich they are. I think it might work in people of like mind. Like you'll have a set of people who are quite well off and they all talk about the areas and the schools they send their children to and the theatres and the local villages and all of that. It might work among them, but I think amongst average people, I don't think they give a toss really. Whether you live in the Buckingham Palace or whether you live underneath Waterloo Bridge, providing your demeanour and the way you come across is acceptable. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. So you do have people who are affluent by association. Like I said, Harpenden is supposed to be quite up and up. And I used to work for a firm of solicitors who moved to Harpenden. And as soon as they knew they was moving to Harpenden, I was one of those that got made redundant. Did it have to do with them not wanting somebody who was black in the front, in the front area, so that who could be seen? Or did it just have something to do with a natural, I wasn't the only person who was made redundant. There was a lot of us. Was it a natural downsizing? But when you think about Harpenden, you do think about the rich part of Harpenden and how there's not much blacks around there and how it's perceived. And some people may well believe that, you've got blacks on your team or in your space and you're bringing down the neighbourhood. That's how some people view black people. It's a given. I mean, people are getting more and more evolved now. It doesn't really, I think by living with us and sharing experiences with us, they more or less realise by now, a lot of them do, that we're just like anybody else. We are no different. Our blood is red and we all go and use the toilet. So I think, as we evolve, it's just a question. Colour shouldn't really come into it. If you live on a street, you live on a street. If it just happens to be you, and as long as you feel comfortable with it, good for you. And as long as they don't make you feel uncomfortable, that's fantastic. I think what is good about where you live and the neighbours you live with is how you get on with your neighbours and because when shit hits the fan, you need help and you can knock on your neighbour's door and ask for help. To me, that is important. I can knock on my neighbour's door. They're white, they just have to happen to be white, but I can knock on any one of my neighbour's door. To me, that's more important than there could be a black person living next door and I might not want to knock on the door and ask them for help. Which relationship is better? So it's about, the choices. And admittedly, when I went to view the house, I made some presumptions about my neighbours just from their appearance. That, and I live in an area where it is what they call it. Is it far right? I don't know. It might be far right, but it's considered a racist area. But when I was buying my house, I didn't think about what the neighbourhood was like. I didn't even know where I was, to be honest. I just found a property that was in my price range that I could do something with. The fact that once I got in there and I realised and the neighbours didn't look too friendly, but then now, they weren't what I thought they were. They, their kind of facial features, that kind of look that some of those BNPs have. And I live in a predominantly BNP neighbourhood. But that look, but even the one who is, we get on. Not that we shake hands and everything, but, he'll take my parcels in. You know what I mean? So I'll take his parcels in. To me, that is what's important, as opposed to whether or not you're the only black person in the neighborhood. And you could be the only black person in the neighborhood, and you could have pure stick from the time you wake up in the morning. Ever seen those programs, Nightmare Neighbours? No way on earth would I want to go through that. No way on earth. So it is about how you feel comfortable, and it is about maybe do I let these people win me over? Do my head in, and I end up moving, or do you stick with it regardless of the hostility, regardless of whatever, and you decide that you, by example, are going to change their minds? So that is what I wanted to talk about today, because I think, sometimes as we talk and as we interact, we do feel it's important to qualify who we are and why we are who we are and what we've achieved and how many A levels and what position we have. I would suggest, just my humble suggestion, if somebody asks you the question, what do? You tell them. But I think for people who offer a stream of accolades, it can be quite daunting. I'm this, and I've got this, and I've done this, and I've done that. And, they're not interested in the person who they're talking to, and they're just literally so pleased with their accomplishments, they want to share them. And I think that is the fear. I think, it should be a two-way engagement, number one. And it should be a situation where you feel proud enough of yourself and value yourself enough not to have to qualify it through titles and areas and stuff like that. Are you going to give me a bollocking? Are you going to turn me over and give me the cane? I'm open to your criticism. I'm open to your feedback. I'm open to anything you've got to say, because this is what this is about. This is about opening up the discussion. Mine is just one viewpoint. There's probably a lot of different viewpoints, and I may be totally off the wall here. And you may think, how important. Well, I don't know what you think, but I'm putting it out there for you to come back at me. And that's all for now. Bye-bye.